Okay, and then as a final example of JavaScript, what I suggest is let's try to do something here with the form, and then we stop here. Okay. So let's suppose that here, for instance, in Imparato, when the tutor registers, he can set a list of the subjects that he can teach. That is something very similar to what you will have to do in the exam. With, well, what was in the exam the requirement with that? Okay, when he books a tour and he can specify if he is going with more people, and he has to write the name of the other participants. So it's basically something pretty similar in this case. So let's try to implement that functionality using JavaScript, and let's see how it works. Okay, so here, for instance, I created this button, no? That is add subject. Thinking of a subject that the tutor that is registering is able to teach. So informatics, mathematics, whatever. So what I'm trying, or what I'm expecting to do here, that when I click the button, a new text input shows, the user inserts the subject, and it saves that information into a form. So it's going to be basically a dynamic form that, depending on each time that the user wants to create a new subject, displays a new input field, the user inserts the input field, and then it dynamically adds new inputs. Okay, so what's the first thing that we are supposed to do here? Basically the same thing that we have done before, adding a listener, but in this case not to the input field but to the button. And in this case it won't be an input listener but a click listener, so that when the user clicks on the button, the JavaScript detects it and does something about it. So well, let's say that this one was the first function for the search, and let's create a new one here. So first of all, we have to reference the button that we want to listen. And this one was called add subject. And then for that specific button, we create the and to make sure it works, we are going to say okay, so in this case, each time that I click on the button, it captures it and displays a message in the console. Why do you think we are getting this error? Because in the specific page that we are in, we don't have this search input, no? Because it belongs to a different page. So since it doesn't find that search input, it says, I can't add a listener to something that is null. What is the solution here, or what should be the solution here? First of all, doing the add event listener, asking if it's not null, okay, doing some verification. In this case, it's not an error, because then when we get back to the, what was that? The tutors page. No. Okay, and here the error is concerning the fact that there is not the add button, because the add button is not present in this specific HTML or in this specific page that we are displaying. Okay, so yeah. Not necessarily, because in that case or maybe one file per function. Yeah, something like that could be useful. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to our registration. Okay, so what do you think I did in this specific portion of code? There are new elements in here, but why did I do here? So this add button is already referencing the button that I will listen to when the user clicks, something will happen. And that something will happen is what I will define within this function. No? So I reference the add button and I add an event listener so that when the button gets clicked, the function that I define in here will be executed. Okay? What I'm doing here? What is this input? What is happening in this line? By using JavaScript, I'm creating an HTML element, right? Which kind of HTML element? An input. Okay? Let's pay attention because here I'm creating the element, but I'm not adding anything to the HTML. So I'm just programmatically creating an HTML element that is going to be an input. And programmatically, I set the properties of that specific element that I'm creating. So I set the type of the element, I set the name of the input, and I set a placeholder for the input. Okay? And finally, what I'm doing here, to the container that is basically a div within the HTML, I'm adding a child. So here is where all of this idea of the DOM and the tree makes sense, no? Because since our HTML is built as a tree, we can add a child to the elements of the tree. So in this case, if you take a look at the HTML, I created this div here, this empty div. That if I leave it like this, it's useless because it doesn't have any content. What's the idea of creating this div in here? It's to create a free space that I can reference from the JavaScript to dynamically populate that specific portion of code when useful or when I need to use it. So here I create the input and I append a child to the container, and that child that I append is the input that I have programmatically created. So if this works, it should look something like this. No? So that when I click the add subject button, it adds a new field. Of course, we have to style this so that the fields are set one below the other one, or in a list, something like that. But here, dynamically, I'm creating fields to add, for instance, the subject name. Again, we can do, using the syntax that we saw before, some kind of control so that no more than 3 inputs can be added to the form, no? Or that we could also here next to each input add another button to delete that specific subject, no? That it's something we would want to do. For instance, I wanted to create a subject, but then I regret and I want to delete that specific field. And in that case, instead of appending a child, it will be deleting a child. Okay. But then what's the problem with this? If I create several fields in here, if I create several inputs in here, how I'm going to deal with that on the back end? Do you know what's the problem in here? That if I create several subject names, how I'm going to deal with the several inputs that I will receive dynamically on the back end? So I'll just show the way of dealing with this. Because here, for instance, in the root that I had to deal with that form, I was expecting to get a name, a surname, an email, and a password. So I was expecting to get like a fixed number of fields or a fixed number of elements coming from this form. But if now it becomes dynamic so that I can add as much subjects as I want, how I'm going to deal with that? So the syntax in here becomes now something like this. I will use the name of the input field so that on the other side I can reference and ask for the list of all the elements that share the same name, okay? And it will retrieve me a list of those elements. So subjects, for instance. And here, for instance, on the back end, you can see that now I receive this array with all of the three fields, with all of the information that the user wrote on the three fields, okay? So for instance, this specific example is useful or might be useful in the functionality of the exam in which I ask you that each participant of a free walking tour might book the walking tour for other three participants. No? So that in that case, you can add dynamically fields in which he can fill out the name of the participants he's trying to add. Is this clear? Was this example clear? Nice. So once again, I repeat you are not required to implement JavaScript in the exam. If you feel you want to try it, and if you feel that you want to integrate these examples into the exam, perfect. Otherwise, you can implement the solution, well, as we have done so far, without adding the dynamic behavior with JavaScript. And, well, that's all. On Friday, I will prepare a very simple lab for Friday so that you can experiment or do some tests with JavaScript applied to our exercise, the one that we have been developing so far. And well, and other than that, next week you already know that we will allocate all of the available time on Monday and on Friday to work on the project. I will be there, so if you want to ask any questions, you are free to ask any questions about the exam. And well, I think that's all. I don't know if you have any questions on the exam or on whatever. Okay, so if you don't, I think we can stop here, and I'll see you on Monday, because Friday there will be Professor De Rusis, so we will see on Monday. Okay? Nice, thank you.